I hear this all the time still, and it doesn't make any sense. No project should ever have live data when it comes to planning and scheduling. It makes zero sense whatsoever. You want to capture that data, you want to distill it, analyze it, make sense of it, report on it, and then go produce it. And none of that resonates with live data. Do not do live data.
When you say, what do you got to think about data architecture? You've got to think about coding, you've got to think about version control, and the third thing is you've got to think about format. So for example, are you just raw saving an XCR file from P6, or are you extracting it as a CSV and putting it into a database and doing things with?
It's two different mindsets when you start thinking about those sorts of issues. And just because you are a junior scheduler or you haven't dealt with this, it's one of those kind of like niche areas that is well worth your time and investment if you're a planner or scheduler looking into, because then you can sit in the meetings and make recommendations or remap your architecture in how you see improvements going on, because you're the one doing the scheduling every single day. You're out there, you're doing the scheduling, you're doing the progress updates. If you can fix or help recommend how to fix some of this back end stuff, that obviously shows that you are thinking about big picture items. Hi, folks. A quick one before we dive into this week's episode. Our book, The Critical Path Career, How to Advance in Construction and Planning and Scheduling, is out now, and you can order it on Amazon. We'll include a link below. This is a great way to show support for the Beyond Deadlines podcast, and Greg and I have worked extremely hard taking everything we know in our 30 years of experience, plus everything we've picked up from shooting this podcast, and we've tried to pack it into an information-dense book that you can use right away. In the book, we have specific strategies on how to get a raise, how to get a promotion, and find a new job. We include 26 of the best interview questions that we have come across, in addition to 34 specific impact ideas that you can go use on your projects today. We want to thank everyone who's shown us support so far, and enjoy this week's episode. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Piippo, and I love scheduling.
My name is Greg Lawton. I also love scheduling.
Each episode is specifically designed to give you strategies and tactics that you can use on a day-to-day basis on any sort of project at all. Today's topic, we are going to dive into schedule architecture. I have no idea what that means. Greg brought it up. He's on the hot seat, so let's grill it. Give me a TikTok reel, 1 minute. What the heck is schedule architecture?
Well, there's two things, schedule architecture and schedule systems architecture. Talking about the second one. Schedule systems architecture is how do you have all your IT set up, your tooling to be able to run a scheduling team and to deliver scheduling on a project. Like if you were in a part of the concreting team, it'd be, right, what's our concreting equipment to do concreting? Here it's like, right, you're in a scheduling team. What is your scheduling equipment to do the scheduling?
Okay, I like that. And I'm catching a theme of you bringing up concrete as an example quite a bit.
I do welding.
You have a passion. You must have a passion for the brick. Okay, so you're talking about software, tooling, and overall are you talking about overall data structures as well too?
We can talk about overall data structures. I think the software and tooling is probably a good area to focus.
Okay. All right. I will bet you $20 you'll bring up notes and links at some point in this episode. All right. So let's dive into this. Let's do instead of doing a brand, most people listening to this episode, I guarantee are not. I was just hired and there's literally no scheduling and no projects, and I can create anything I ever wanted. Most people are going to be in environments where these structures are set up. My first thought process is understanding that all of the stuff that is set up could be changed. That's kind of like a break-free Neo taking the blue pill. I don't actually remember what pill did he take in the Matrix? Blue pill, red pill?
I think it's red pill.
All right. Well, yeah, take the red pill, break free. You can change anything you want, but let's operate within the bounds that then you have to actually get approval, talk to people, get stuff changed. You're sitting there in an environment let's say you're running Primavera P6, you got a couple Power BI dashboards. Where are you attacking your architecture to improve it, to make it better, or change it?
So I think the first question is, what's the job to be done and what you're trying to achieve here? Because these are all just tools. It's like a concreting truck. Or a hammer or whatever it is. So when people think about scheduling, and by the way, this is something that when we're talking about this today, because when you progress into a head of scheduling or a senior management role in terms of scheduling, this is one of the key things you have to think about, which is how do you tool your projects and your teams so that people can
This makes your life so much easier as well. This is one of those things. I played dumb in the beginning. This is like a passionate topic of mine. One of those things where when you look at, or I talk to people who are having all this chaos, in their projects, it's because they didn't set this up at the beginning. I'm spending hours and hours pulling and creating reports. It takes us hours to create, this or that. Or the other one is maybe things are going okay and you actually want to change something, but it's so rigid and fixed that you can't. Mm-hmm. That's another big one that I see.
So what I'll do here is I'll bucket systems into 3 buckets, and these are false buckets, but I'm doing it for simplicity. We're schedulers. Bucket number 1 is scheduling. Vast majority of people are Primavera P6. Even if you're doing a ground-based scheduling, so you've got control teams and superintendents doing a bit of scheduling, then feeding up, you might have Microsoft Project in that ecosystem, even if your teams aren't using it. So it's, the translation there. And then you might have something like Power Project or something like that. But you've got your scheduling system. How do I do a schedule? The second element is communication. So we talked about a Power BI dashboard. Back in the day, it was PowerPoint systems. Excel will feature in some way. Email will feature in some way. And I know you might think, well, email's not... No, but it's like, these are tools. I've got to think, if I've got a schedule and I need to tell people about the schedule, what are all the different bits of software I need to flow through to try and get the result done? The project manager might not care that I had to fly through Power BI or Excel or whatever. They just care that I'm telling them on time with a format that they appreciate. And then the third bucket is play nice. There isn't just a scheduling team in the project. There's also a cost team, a risk team. You might have a controls team, there's a commercial team, and it's, okay, well, there might be decisions being made above scheduling about how data is stored and how data is structured, which feeds the architecture. So, for example, if someone says, we are storing everything in a massive data lake, then it's like, okay, well, how am I linking P6 to a data lake to make sure, et cetera, et cetera? So I'd just do it as the core job, which is scheduling, the core job, which is communication, and then playing nice with everything else.
Maybe the third bucket, some sort of data integration bucket or something like that, how it plays nice. One of my favorite times of my life was I was working for a large company, and they had hired some people to create their back-end data structures. And at Google, we had every single schedule file and every single update stored in a way that you could pull it at any time. It was Google, search the internet, blah, blah, blah. This company had decided to merge multiple schedule updates into one. And so you never could get to, it was like they averaged all the activities in some back-end system. Like you never could get to the activity for the update to do that sort of data analysis to enable it. Never could get that unraveled. And so we had to then create all these side. And so what you find out in each 3 of these buckets is they bring their own level of complexity to each one. So actually, I want to dive into the third bucket to start out with, the data bucket, because to me, this is actually empowers the next 2 and what people should be smartest about. So I see things where people potentially overcomplicate coding their schedule, or they undercomplicate it, like they have no codes or nothing, so they can't pull any data through, or they overcomplicate it and they create these structures where you have to have a specific code on your schedule and the activity ID has to be put in a certain way and the project file has to be coded a certain way, and all of that coding has to be absolutely perfect or it doesn't pull through. And then you got to think about how you're going to connect everything. Now, most not most. There's some people who will come out here and be like, well, guys, this has already been fixed. It's called advanced work packaging. And this work package connects to this advanced work package and there's a coding structure and blah, 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 right? Great stuff, but not everybody can implement that. And it doesn't always solve your problem because it creates more complexity. So walk me through data structuring 101.
So data structuring 101 actually overlaps something that sits a little outside of schedules systems architecture, which is policies and procedures. So if I'm a senior manager and I'm responsible for providing scheduling capability, capability is people, processes, and tools. So those three need to kind of work in unison. So when we're looking at coding structures here, we're actually, and I'll go beyond, when we're looking at data architecture, what we're really looking at is three things. Number one is we're looking at the actual coding structures that we put on the data. So are you having multiple WBSs? Are you including an ABS, an OBS, a CBS, whatever you want BS, and at what level?
Give me one of those, whatever you want BS.
Whatever you want BSs. And the second thing...
By the way, the P6 WBS, boy, that is a tough one to pull out through the backend system. You may want to think about activity codes if you're thinking about doing any sort of data extraction. But give me some more whatever you want BS.
That's it. Do you know what? Tactics and strategies you can use right away. Most of the clients that we work with that actually have more advanced systems use an ABS because it's much more easy to extract the data. Because P6 is actually designed so that you can't extract it, and Primavera have just updated their terms and conditions from 2025 to state that if you connect their systems to any other system, everybody who uses those other systems need a license to P6.
I saw a post on that, and we need to get one of the Oracle people on here to talk about that one.
We need to ask about that because that is unbelievably aggressive.
Yeah, and it's
by the
one
way,
of those
to
ones
their customers, as in, I saw the post that they do have compliance teams and they send compliance teams into customers.
Yeah, well, you can't believe everything you read on the internet, right?
Yeah.
And so if it's just one person reading through terms and services speculating, I have not personally read through the terms and services, and I don't want to go into a crazy
let's say that this is all opinion. We'll get an Oracle person on.
Yeah, we need to verify this.
Going back to the points, you have your coding structures. The second thing is version control. Because if you're looking about how you're structuring this data, it's how things are being saved. Because really, if you've got a database, you're extracting something and then you're saving something. Now, even live databases aren't live. They extract and save it just really quickly, like every second or half second or something.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about here is how are you version controlling these things? Is it just I drop it and save it and it's called project schedule final 01? Yeah. Or are you actually,
right there with your anything BS? Hey, here's a tactic and strategy. I hear this all the time still, and it doesn't make any sense. No project should ever have live data when it comes to planning and scheduling. It makes zero sense whatsoever. No. You want to capture that data. You want to distill it, analyze it, make sense of it, report on it, and then go produce it. And none of that resonates with live data. It should be some sort of weekly, monthly cadence that you're following. Do not do live data. Always have a data freeze in place, because if you do have live data, mild shock here, the company I was previously talking about that had the data aggregation literally had quote unquote live data where anything you changed in P6 within an hour would pump through in the system. So if someone was messing around with the schedule, moved a bunch of financial milestones right before that big management meeting, well, buddy, that was a fun conversation with the vice president. Why is your project 3 months late? Well, Kevin over here didn't get his cup of coffee in the morning and screwed it all up. And now, what are we doing here? Wasting cycles talking about, button click. Anyways, we're way off topic here. Let's bring it back. Data architecture. Let's go to the next one.
So we got
put a bow on that and let's get to communication.
So when you say, what do you got to think about data architecture? You've got to think about coding. You've got to think about version control. And the third thing is you've got to think about format. So for example, are you just raw saving an XCR file from P6? Or are you extracting it as a CSV and putting it into a database and doing things with? These are things that, if you've got a scheduling team, they're not going to think about this. But if you're a senior scheduling manager and you're thinking about the policies of the organization and the goals that you're trying to achieve. So, for example, the global head of projects may say every project needs to save their files in a CSV in this kind of format because they're going to do some group-wide analysis or something like that. It's this kind of thought. So it's really about those format. And then all I'd say about those is you need to be incredibly careful when you set the project up that you give yourself flexibility without killing yourself with work every single month.
I do enjoy when I look down a critical milestone sheet and it's like milestone 001, milestone 002, milestone 003. And then I'm like, well, what if you want to put a milestone between 1 and 2? That's the simple case. The other one, don't sit on the bench and let your IT department do all of this. They will take, they're going to illegally now, connect P6 to Power BI or some backend system. They need to go through and they'll probably start renaming the columns in their SQL database that they're extracting the data into. Okay. They don't understand what an early start is or a late start or early finish or a late finish or any of the columns that are coming in. Columns, which they'll just see as data structures. And I was working for a company one time. They renamed everything into a whole new weird thing. So you had the front-facing UI Primavera P6 term. Primavera P6 has weird back-end terms that if you go to extract the data out of, like if you ever do an export out of P6, you're going to see those multiple columns in Excel. And then they renamed it something else. So then I had to create a codex or Rosetta Stone that was like, if this is this, is that this. If all I had to do is sat with them and told them, listen, no, we're going to rename them all the front-facing thing, it would have made my life super easy. So don't sit the bench on those conversations and get involved. And also, if it's already been created, understand what those creations are, because that'll help you understand what you can create and do with your data. All right. Communication time.
So communication really comes in two forms. You have formal and informal. Formal is the thing that needs to be saved and put in a cupboard somewhere, because if everything goes west, then a lawyer team are going to come in and say, give me that document. Informal is the information that people need to execute the job of the project. And it can be as simple as giving someone a call and saying, hey, I think you need to look at something because it's looking behind or something like that. But any time that information leaves the scheduling team and goes to another department or another audience, that really needs to be considered. Now, why I say formal and informal is because the actual systems architecture of those two things are fundamentally different. So the systems architecture of an informal one can be a Teams chat or a Teams call or more of a
well, let's splice and dice
custom
this really quick,
dashboard
because when
like
you said formal, I was initially thinking, SLO, SLIs, SLAs, and then you went on to legal. So is formal communication just the legal piece, or is it, because we had in previous organizations, like a service level organization agreement that we were going to meet these like SLAs. You can go read the definitions up and I'll probably screw them up. And that would mean that every month I will update these scheduled milestones at this time. And if they get out of this variance, I'm going to come to you as a customer because it's a big organization. We weren't delivering to external people yet then. And I'm going to tell you about how I botched delivering this project. I'm also going to provide these reports and this data refresh and all these things that I'm going to do. Is that formal or is that informal?
I would define formal as where you are required to write it down and save it. It's those two things: write it down and save it. So, for example, you and I were talking the other day about providing a report to a client and then having a call to walk them through it. Providing the report is that it's written and saved. The call to walk them through it, if it was recorded and saved, it's formal. If it wasn't recorded or it wasn't saved, it's informal. You're talking someone through something. Now, is this a blurred line of a spectrum? Of course, absolutely. But if you're talking about writing something down or recording it and saving it, That's a systems architecture question. And if you're talking about easily communicating with people, that's a simpler but also a systems architecture problem. So, for example, you're currently sitting in the United States, I'm currently sitting in Switzerland. We're
That you know
using,
of.
yeah, I don't know where you might be.
I could be in international waters.
Yeah, you could be. And I do know
I
why
just
you're in the United
moved
States, but I know you're on
everything
holiday
on.
there last week.
I moved everything into a boat and to make it look the exact same. And now you don't know where I am. That's Starlink
It could
Wi-Fi.
be as simple as, okay, Teams. But here's the thing. So, for example, Teams is used by a large number of companies, but Google Meets is blocked. So, there's a conversation there.
Yeah.
But really, the thing, that's an outside conversation. The real key thing is how am I doing my formal reporting? So we went
Yeah.
through an enormous wave of PowerPoint and SharePoint saving. Then we've gone through an enormous wave of Power BI. Now there's a lot of people talking about agentic AI and these kinds of things, all different shades of green. It's all kind of the same thing. It's what is the medium by which I can very effectively get the information out of the scheduling systems with an interpretation by an intelligent scheduler to the people I need in the least amount of effort and time possible, whilst making sure that I maintain high quality, I record it, and I save it. That is an architecture problem.
Yeah, and that's I was kind of foreseeing this conversation. I wanted to start at the data part of it because to me that's where you have to start, manipulating things and doing codings and figuring, what you want, but if you don't go back to the data and figure it out, I mean, sometimes you have to go do the most craziest things. And just like you said, it's not the most efficient. If you have to create this massive coding structure that you're spending hours and hours and hours and days trying to keep updated in all your project updates just to make the thing work, you could have redone it at the beginning, or made it simpler or easier. Okay, cool. That communication makes sense. We should shoot a whole nother episode on like interorganizational kind of scheduling, setting up SLOs, SLAs, because I don't see that happen a lot in many companies. And then you end up being the beatdown of every organization
By the way, just out of
when
interest,
stuff doesn't happen correctly,
no, out of interest, that's actually where the majority of AI is actually hitting in scheduling. People fear that it would hit in the scheduling space because if you think about it, Primavera was originally developed because it had a scheduling engine. You could reschedule and you could resource load and do these things. It was and it still is an incredibly technical product for qualified and trained schedulers to do difficult business problems. It was never designed as a reporting system or a communication system or even a visualization system. Like I know a lot of organizations that buy P6 licenses to give to their engineers and they're like, what am I really looking at here? Like, what is this? Where AI and modern technology is coming in is actually not really about replacing the core use case of P6. It's about replacing the bastardized use cases that it had to be used for and the communication systems had to be used for, but they were never designed to be. So, for example, an AI agent could sit at the front line and answer questions of a project director, which are basic in nature. So, where's the project up to? What happened last week? What changes went through? Did anything affect the contract? Like these kinds of things. It could also produce the narrative along formal reports. So, what we're personally seeing is that and the systems architecture bit where you link with other systems, so the APIs, because fundamentally AI systems have to be on the cloud, and the cloud is actually how you communicate with a lot of the other technologies. That is the two areas that are being disrupted and changed, not the scheduling area. Yes, there are technologies where you can use large language models to create schedules and these kinds of things, but they're actually really not being adopted at the pace that you see the other elements being adopted. The other elements are like 10 to 100 times faster in being adopted than those core, deeply technical skills.
It makes a lot of sense, though. What is easiest to use, easiest to understand? What is higher frequency? You're going to do hundreds of schedule updates and you're probably going to create one or two schedules. I do think you could probably create, with the right data set and large language module technology, you could create one heck of a schedule. But I definitely see, just from a layperson's, on our newsletter, I create a prompt every single week. I doubt, there's probably, out of the couple thousands of people that read the newsletter, I bet there's like 3 people who are trying the prompts out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's such a, we're moving towards such a weird place of agency, where most stuff was always like forcibly taught to you, and you had to go. So for example, like Primavera P6, right? You would take a course in Primavera P6, you'd sit next to somebody who would, and you'd have to use it for your job. Like, you were kind of forced through the hole, with this new technology, especially with chat. This is when I say agency, this is you. This is like you going out, figuring this out and doing it yourself. And it's so to me, that's that early adopter phase. And that's where, going back to what we're talking about, that operations makes sense, where people are diving into it more, creating reports, getting their data faster, getting automated pings to their PMs to update their schedules, because that's what's easiest to go tackle and go do. And it saves people the most time. But then, the other dominoes eventually will fall. And that's when things are going to get real weird.
There'll be different bits. You're right. The other point that you've made me think about here relates to our book, Critical Path Career, which is the conversation we're having today. Until people get to senior management, like the scheduling manager stage, they generally won't be exposed to this level of conversation. And it's worth saying that what is the fundamental difference between a scheduler who's using P6 day in, day out, and a senior scheduling manager that's thinking about team? Now, and I say that because you can have senior scheduling manager that are incredibly deeply technical on things like delay and claim analysis, different back. Yeah. But if you're thinking about team, like I say, their job is to provide a capability, not to do the scheduling, to provide a scheduling capability. And how do you do a capability? It's people, processes, and tools. Now, people is about hiring and management and leadership, which is a set of skills which I think all of the listeners can appreciate is a genuine set of skills. But you've got the other two, which are processes, which we've talked about in many videos, but it's things like the schedule management process, the updating process, and the training that surrounds those, and the governance and compliance. And then the third is the tools, which is fundamentally the architecture discussion. So deciding what systems and how are they going to interlink for the entire team to deliver the mission successfully. And what I see is a kind of bell-shaped curve in the market, where you've got bell-shaped curve of skill, but what I'd say is where people try and be too ambitious and end up creating a terrible amount of work trying to be too, and where people don't understand what they're doing and create a terrible amount of work because they're manually doing stuff. And somewhere in the middle is a sweet spot where...
And that's where you get the anything WBS.
Yeah. So, for example, one would be, I'm going to code my schedule in a very logical activity breakdown structure, but I'm going to leave redundancy. And I'm going to have some very simple checks to make sure people aren't making mistakes. What I'm not going to do is insist on a level 9 schedule that's fully resourced. It's like, okay, these kinds of things.
There's a couple different things you can do there too. I've seen companies that just like punt the actual WBS and goes only activity codes, which is strange to me, because that's how people navigate typically through a schedule. Not the craziest thing in the world, but definitely an interesting route to do. You can create too many redundancies in your schedule. So let's say you wanted to pull a specific scope out of your schedule, making someone use a specific activity ID prefix, adding a specific activity code to it, maybe a couple different codes to it, and then a specific resource. So then to go pull that stuff out of the system, you have to write a ridiculous and statement. And then if the contractor who's supposed to implement the code isn't on board, or maybe you're doing it late in the game, you're constantly weekly checking whether those activity codes are there. And instead of just figuring out maybe a simpler setup or system to it, maybe you just put an activity name prefix in there or something that like they can just immediately pull out of the system. It's two different mindsets when you start thinking about those sorts of issues. And just because you are a junior scheduler or you haven't dealt with this, I mean, it's one of those kind of like niche areas that is well worth your time and investment if you're a planner or scheduler looking into, because then you can sit in the meetings and make recommendations or remap your architecture in how you see improvements going on, because you're the one doing the scheduling every single day. You're out there, you're doing the scheduling, you're doing the progress updates. If you can fix or help recommend how to fix some of this back end stuff, that obviously shows that you are thinking about big picture items. They're usually cross-company efforts as well. So there's your impact and scope, and it's one of those ones where it really helps to set you apart. So even if this doesn't necessarily your job now, getting into your job, as we've talked about many times before, and showing that you're capable of that job is a great way to start setting yourself apart and differentiating yourself from the crowd. Greg, any final words before we kick off?
I think just two things. Number one is there's some concepts like the 2 groups of 3s that I mentioned before that you need to be aware of, and it's really the point number one is to just be aware that this exists, and that if you're looking to move into that kind of role someday, or you're already in that role, like that senior role, this is something that you genuinely have to be thinking about. And it's, you're not reinventing the wheel. People have figured this out, and there's material, but it's just being familiarized. And then the second element, which is, I'll do a shameless kind of plug, which is there's a lot of things that are now changing in that dynamic of scheduling systems, communication, and architecture. And really, companies like Nodes and Links actually exist to make sure that the changes are not enforced on scheduling, but are actually controlled by scheduling. Believe it or not, our system isn't actually about, at its heart, doing scheduling or anything like that. What's going to happen is you've got all of this AI and these GPT systems that will come in via the IT department because they're cross-functional, and they'll be imposed on functions like scheduling, which means that it will be a direct link into the databases, at which point there'll be massive problems about how you control messaging leaving scheduling and the data creation. Whereas if there's actual barriers that control that, and control the communication, you can basically control the message that gets out and get all of the automations in there. So I just have that mental picture in your head going forward. And then really it's just a scale of how good this AI and how good these automations get to how much of the job can be made easier.
Brilliant. Well, folks, start small, one bite at a time, and build something big and beautiful. For us at Beyond Deadlines, thank you for joining us this week. And as always, we'll catch you on the next one. If you could do us a big favor, like, subscribe, share. If you're walking your dog and for some reason you bump into somebody else who's another scheduler walking their dog, ask them, hey, man or woman, are you listening to the Beyond Deadlines podcast? It helps us out greatly, grow the audience.
You're a scheduler. Like, genuinely, do schedulers walk with a different
I don't know. That probably never happened. But hey, you know what? Lightning has struck twice in the same place before. It's science. All right, folks. We'll see you on the next one.